We are recording, Lynn. Let's just see. We've got no attendees yet.
Okay. Well, we're going to take the first part of this meeting to do the reorganization of the Community Resources Committee. So, good evening. It is January 28th, 2025. And this is the first time that the Community Resources Committee has met reorganized under the council in this year of the year 2025. So our first responsibility is to elect a chair, and then I will turn the meeting over to the chair and I will be exited into the audience. And the chair will then conduct the election of the vice chair. But before I start that, let me just point out that returning to the committee are Pam Rooney, Jennifer Taub, Councillor Haneke, and Pat DeAngelis. And new to the committee is Kathy Shane. And Dave Zomack, you are the ongoing staff to this committee, and I know that several of people work with you, Christine Brestrup and Nate Malloy. And of course, Athena is here as well. So let me just mention that public comment will also come after this, and the rest of this will be conducted by whoever is elected chair. So the floor is open for nominations for chair.
Would you just please confirm that people can hear and be heard?
Thank you. I forgot that piece.
Excellent.
So let me make sure that people can hear and be heard. I will go in alphabetical order. Pat DeAngelis.
Present.
Councillor Haneke.
Present.
Pam Rooney.
I'm here.
Jennifer, Kathy Shane.
I'm here.
Jennifer Taub.
Here.
Thank you. And David? Okay.
Yes, I can hear. Thank you, Lynn.
Great. All right. Anything else I missed? Okay. The floor is open for nominations for chair of CRC. Jennifer.
I nominate Pam Rooney.
Okay. Pam, do you accept that nomination?
I do, and thank you.
Are there other nominations? Pat?
She's
you have to
muted.
unmute.
Sorry. I haven't asked either one of them, but I would love to see Mandy or Kathy as chair. So
I
nominate Kathy Shane.
Okay. Kathy, do you accept?
No, I don't, because I am interested in chairing another major committee.
That makes sense. And I nominate Councillor Haneke then.
Councillor Haneke, do you accept?
No, but I appreciate the nomination, Pat.
Okay.
I should have said that also, Pat.
Oh, you don't worry. Don't worry
Okay.
about that kind of stuff.
Pam, are there, would you like to say anything?
I would like to say that I have appreciated being the chair for the past year and have learned an extraordinary amount. Also appreciate the work that Mandy Jo Haneke did before me in setting up templates and examples of processes and things like that, which I've relied on heavily. So I have leaned on the shoulders below me, or however you say that.
Before you.
Before me, thank you.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments from councillors? Okay. Then I'm going to again go in alphabetical order and ask for people to vote. I'm going to begin with Pat DeAngelis.
Abstain.
I'm going to go to Councillor Haneke.
I vote for Councillor Pam Rooney.
Pam Rooney.
Pam Rooney.
Kathy Shane.
Pam Rooney.
Jennifer Taub.
Pam Rooney.
The vote is 4 in favor of Pam Rooney, 1 abstention. I'm now going to turn this back over to Pam Rooney, and I'm going to ask Athena to place me in the audience, along with the one other attendee.
Lynn, thank you very much.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
it.
Enjoy.
Yeah, that's not the word I'd use, but Thank you. Let us open up the floor for nominations for vice chair. Kathy,
I will nominate Jennifer Taub, who I believe has served in that capacity before. And my understanding watching it, has done a great job with organizing interviews and other duties of the vice chair.
Jennifer, do you accept?
Yes, I accept, although if anybody else would like to be chair, but thank you. But I
Any
don't
other
drive anyone else.
Would anyone else like to be nominated or nominate someone else? I see no other hands. So I think the nomination for vice chair is on the table, and we'll go in order of my screen. Counselor Haneke,
I vote for Counselor Jennifer Taub.
Pat DeAngelis,
I vote for Jennifer.
Kathy Shane,
I vote for Jennifer.
Jennifer Taub,
I vote for myself.
and Pam Rooney would also appreciate Jennifer Taub. Thank you. Don't everybody rush to be
Yeah.
vice.
Thank you, but yeah, and Pam, let me know if there's more I can do to be of assistance.
Thank you. I've appreciated that. We will move on to item number 3, which is the public hearing. Is it 6? Oh, we have 2 more minutes. So let's move to one of the last items, and that's approval of minutes. We have had in our packet the March 3, 2024 for a while, and I literally just noticed the April 9 and May 14 that were in the public packet posted, but were not in our SharePoint site. So if people, I'd like to just see hands if people saw those in time to work on those today. Okay, good.
I have a question.
Mhm.
The March 26th minutes are in the packet, but not on this agenda, so.
The agenda is outdated because it was done, there was some they were sort of in the works. The April 30 and May 14 were in the works. So are you looking at the public note agenda or are in the SharePoint agenda?
The one that was in SharePoint, because I always download the packet from SharePoint.
Yeah, me too. I think they were not included in that
So
because
we'll hold them till next meeting.
I'd be happy to do
Okay.
that. Yeah. So the ones that we do have are March 3 and yeah. March 3 would be the one.
Pam, I have on the agenda that's publicly posted, March 26, April 9, April 30, and May 14.
Okay, I did not see the April 26 one.
No, I don't think that one is finished, but the March 26 is on the agenda.
Oh, March 26. I didn't see that one either. And again, we just saw them in the, I just happened to bump into them in the public packet. So I have looked at them, but I wasn't prepared to force everybody else to read them in short order. Let's start with March 3 and we can decide if there are enough viewers of the other ones to process them. So March 3.
Can I ask a question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's fine.
Athena, did you just say that March 3 is not on the publicly posted agenda? And if that's the case, can we vote on them tonight?
March 3 is not. March 26, April 9, April 30, May 14. So you can vote on those. And I'm just checking which ones were in the packet.
So that's weird because we had the March 3 in our packet since last meeting. And I'm not sure why that of anything, because I thought I sent that to you on the 21st, why that wouldn't have been included.
Yeah, obviously there was some mix up with what went in the packet and what went on the agenda. So apologies for that. Let me, so March 26th is in there. You can approve those if you like. And then April 9. So you could approve those two, March 26th and April 9.
I think May 14th's in there as well. In the public packet.
Oh, maybe I didn't see that one.
Yeah, it's there.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I didn't see that one. March 26, April 9, and May 14. You could approve.
Let's take a quick hand raise poll. Are people comfortable voting on these if they were not in our SharePoint packet? Okay, so let's process these then. Are there comments, are there corrections to the March 3 meeting minutes?
We're not voting on March 3.
You're right. It's the only one I've been holding on to here to get approved finally. Okay, you're right. Let's X out of that one. March 26th, any changes or modifications to March 26th? And by the way, Athena, thank you for getting these finally processed. Comments or motion to accept?
I move that we accept the minutes of the March 26, 2024 CRC meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor will go in visual order. Councillor Haneke,
Aye.
Pat DeAngelis,
Aye.
Kathy Shane. Abstain, I think I heard Jennifer,
Yes.
and Pam is a yes. So that is 4 yes and 1 abstain. We are looking now at April 9. Are there any corrections or additions? Probably corrections or comments? And if not, would someone like to make a motion to accept?
I move to adopt the April 9, 2024 meeting minutes.
Second,
Second.
all those in favor, Pat DeAngelis, Councillor Haneke,
But I did not hear Councillor DeAngelis. Is my audio a little slow?
no, I saw her mouth move.
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
I'll have to watch what I say when I'm muted.
You got to work with what you have. Let's see, where do we leave off? Kathy Shane. Didn't hear her either, but I think
I'm going to abstain on all the minutes, but I will
Okay.
do it. I'll remember to do it each time. I
Okay.
wasn't there and I didn't read them.
Right, Jennifer
Yes.
and Pam is a yes, so that's 4 yes and 1 abstention for the April 9 meeting. And last but not least, at least for now, is the May 14. Any corrections or comments? I will make a comment, and that is, oh my gosh, that was 8 months ago, and we're talking about some of the same things. So we need to get a move on. Does anyone want to make a motion?
I move that we accept the May 14th, 2024 minutes.
Thank you. Any second?
Second.
And the vote is Counselor Haneke,
Aye.
Pat DeAngelis,
Aye.
Kathy Shane,
Abstain.
Jennifer Taub,
Yes.
and Pam Rennie's a yes. That is a vote of 4-1, 4 yes, 1 abstention. And the 5/14/2024 meeting minutes are approved. Thank you all for that. Okay, so we don't need to do those later. We are going to continue the public hearing on University Drive. In accordance with the provisions of Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, this public hearing of the Community Resources Committee of the Amherst Town Council has been duly advertised, and notice thereof has been posted and is being held for the purpose of providing the opportunity for interested residents to be heard regarding the following proposed amendments to the zoning bylaw. As referred to this committee by the Town Council, a proposed zoning bylaw, Article 17, University Drive Overlay District, to consider amending the zoning bylaw by adopting the University Drive Overlay District as Article 17 and amending the official zoning map by adding the University Drive Overlay District. The overlay district would include properties on the east and west sides of University Drive between Northampton Road and Amity Street, and would establish its own requirements for only mixed-use buildings, including dimensional standards and conditions, and design guidelines. And I see Nate and appreciate that you have provided us with a January 2022 version of the overlay amendment. And we got 2 versions of it. I think they're both in our SharePoint packet, and one is sort of the cleaned up version of what you developed after hearing the planning board, or what the planning board voted. You want to take it from there?
Sure, thanks. Hi, everyone. Nate Malloy, a planner with the town. Yes, last week the planning board voted to recommend the January, I may say the 14th on the top. It was updated recently to say the 22nd version of the overlay. There were some changes made last week in response to some of the CRC comments and questions. And I can go through those. And so they voted to recommend that version to council. I'll share my screen now. If this is visible for everyone, the first is Article 2. In Article 2, we define zoning districts, and so that hadn't been included before. We spoke with Attorney Murray at KP Law, and she thought this would, as part of the discussion, it doesn't need to be advertised or, changed. It's kind of included in this, that if we talk about a district, we can administratively add it to Article 2. So here we'd have a description of what Article 2 is. It's really similar to the preamble that Pam read. I would say the University Drive Overlay District. The University Drive Overlay District is an overlay district intended to encourage economic development and expand housing opportunity, including housing for undergraduate students, by allowing mixed-use buildings in an area that is currently zoned limited business and office park along the east and west sides of University Drive between Northampton Road, Route 9, and Amity Street. And so this is actually a pretty thorough description. Sometimes in Article 2, it's just a 1 or 2 line, really brief description of the zoning districts. And so that's something that the planning board recommended. So then the track changes in this version capture kind of the last 2 discussions with the CRC and also with the planning board. So, but it is the current version. Everything shown here in text is what the planning board voted. So in the general section, there was discussion about changing the name, adding it to mixed use, or changing this to applicability, but they decided not to. They didn't think that was necessary. They liked the inclusion of this statement: the overlay district shall apply only to mixed use buildings. And then they clarified the later part of this paragraph to read, therefore, the standards and conditions in section 3.325 of the zoning bylaw do not apply in the overlay district, and any mixed use building proposed in the overlay shall be permitted using the mixed use overlay district. And so, you know, to clarify that someone couldn't, you know, it's really that if they propose a mixed-use building, they use the overlay, they wouldn't use the base zoning. I see there is a hand raised. I don't know how.
Thank you. That's fine. That's good. Thank you. I was reading, not looking. Counselor Haneke.
I think you just answered this, but at least what you just said, I think I've got the answer to it. The OP doesn't allow mixed use buildings, but the BL does allow mixed use buildings. It was my understanding that if a developer or, you know, a property owner wanted to choose not to use the overlay, they could use the underlying mixed use building standards. This sentence changes that, and
So
that means that in the BL, there's no option to use the underlying standards for mixed use.
Right. And you know, honestly, I don't know if that was ever the intention that there'd be that option. So I don't know why someone would use that, given the additional lot area, the limitations on the gross floor area and units and everything. So this just clarifies that.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Excuse me.
It's also, you know, I think some of it would be, you know, if in zoning you'd want to have at least some, you know, I know in some of your comments, Manny, say some predictability, but it would be odd if someone could choose to build a mixed use one way or the other, and then kind of tailor it depending on the situation and try to manipulate something. So here it's really, if they want a mixed use building, it's through the overlay. I mean, it's similar to say like a 40R where some of the developments, you know, it's voluntary to use the overlay, but if you do, then you have to comply with it. So here the mixed use building has to do the overlay.
Nate, before you move off that paragraph, when I was reading it through as a, you know, pretending to not have ever read it before, the internal sentence talking about the overlay district establishes requirements, and it says that including dimensional standards and conditions, comma, and design guidelines that shall be used. You say rather than those standards in this bylaw. Those standards in this bylaw confused me. And I wonder if we might want to say something more like the design guidelines that shall be used in place of underlying zoning requirements.
I mean, or we could, you know, remove that. If we want to do something like that, we don't, that way we're not, right, we're not referencing some part of a bylaw. We just say it establishes its own requirements.
Yes, that would be clearer. Thank you.
And as I mentioned before, there's a definition of a mixed-use building in the zoning bylaw, and so that remains. It's a pretty general definition. In the purpose here, we say that this area is in close proximity to UMass. This is a change that's was put in a little bit ago. You know, the rest of this hasn't changed. And so
hold on just a second. Hold on just a second. Don't scroll too far. Councilor Haneke.
It reads weird in an area that is currently zoned BL or OP and is with close proximity. Is it supposed to be within or is in? It just reads weird.
Sorry, geez.
Thank you. Yep, that was my comment.
Yeah, thanks. I have one other staff person reading this for things like that, and she caught a few things today since I feel like I've looked at it so much.
Right, you don't see it. Kathy Shane.
Yeah, no, I don't like to do wordsmithing, but I'm going to jump in here, and later I have a more substantive comment. I think since when I look at the map, we've got limited business zone and offer park. So I would, instead of an area, I would, in areas that are currently zoned, would make more sense to me when I look at the map, because there's actually one that's sort of research park too. So that was just in areas that are, then that's one, and everyone can listen to that. I'm not sure why the little clause, including housing for undergraduate students, is necessary. We just said expand housing opportunity, and it reads much cleaner. It's just I'm not sure why, and I see it's both in the purpose and it comes back later. I'm not sure why that clause is there. It doesn't seem to me it's necessary, since they're they're eligible, so are graduate students, so are people who aren't. So I don't think we have any rental properties in town that exclude undergraduate students, you know, if they want to pay the rent. So I didn't know why that clause is there.
Yeah, the planning board considered that because in some recent developments, there's been some discussion saying, well, let's try to limit a mixed-use building to only 85% of the units to students and the rest have to be non-students, or if it's over that, they have to have like a live-in manager. And so they really don't want to have that discussion later on in the overlay, so that, you know, putting this in here is, you know, there's no surprise that undergraduates may be the target audience for some of the units. And so that's kind of why they had it in there. You know, kind of for emphasis. I agree, it may be unnecessary in terms of what's allowed, but it's just, you know, for emphasis or clarity.
I guess to me, it's unnecessary and it's unusual for a zoning bylaw to talk about who's going to be living there unless we're talking about affordable. So, but, so let me ask you, if someone wanted to build one of these, would they have to take undergraduates or could they restrict it? You know,
So
so
we don't
is this saying thou must, you know, so I'm just saying, is the clause necessary at all? And does it do something that we might not want it to do?
Like I said, I think it's necessary so that if someone comes in and they ask, well, okay, you're proposing 100 units, and the applicant says, yeah, and most of them will, 90 units might be targeted students, someone can say, oh, that's not what we really want here. And so because we call it out in the overlay. And like I've said, we've had these discussions with other projects permitted around town, and it becomes, you know, something, you know, people don't like the idea that a majority of rental units will be student rentals.
Okay,
And so I think
I
for the-
won't belabor it, but you just don't find that in any of the other, when we've brought in big housing projects, we haven't done that. So I just found it unusual. So if no one else is struck by that, to me, it's their words. Yeah.
Counselor Haneke and then Jennifer.
I agree with Kathy. Zoning is not supposed to preference the occupants, one set of occupants over another. When we were reading the Article 2 new insert, I thought it was strange that the clause was there too, instead of just expand housing opportunity by allowing mixed use buildings. So I agree with Kathy. I would delete that clause both up above in Article 2's insert and here in the purpose.
So if the CRC would like to delete it, we can. You know, the planning board has already made their recommendations, and the CRC can make your set of recommendations and have some, you know, changes to this bylaw. So if the CRC wants to remove it from both sections, maybe in 3 sections.
I'm
at least
going to
2.
ask before Jennifer, I'm going to just ask a process question. We are expecting a report from the planning board within a couple of weeks of them closing their hearing. I think I understood from listening that they're sending a report to town council. So that would be on the 10th of town council would probably read it on the 10th of February. Does that leave us in limbo for making our own decisions and or closing the hearing or whatever prior to that? Counselor Haneke, are you responding to that? Okay, what, if you want to just answer the question, sorry, Jennifer.
Yeah, so the council can't have its first reading until GOL has finished with it, which GOL only gets whatever we as a CRC send to GOL. And then GOL makes its clear, consistent, and actionability ruling on what we send to GOL, not what the planning board sends. It is not unusual to have a few differences in versions. In that case, a report from CRC should, if there are differences, CRC's report should highlight the differences and indicate why CRC chose to add or subtract or change for whatever reason. But GOL has to rule clear, consistent, and actionability on the version we send over after we finish and make our recommendation, and then the council will have its first reading after GOL has completed that process. But the council must have a second reading within, I think it's 60 days I'd have to look at the law within a certain time frame of us closing our hearing.
But if the planning board report is going directly to town council rather than to CRC, it seems like we will have to wait for that to trickle back to us.
Not necessarily. CRC has not always waited for the written report. In the past, we've generally just gotten a summary from the staff as to what their vote was and gotten the copy they voted on, which is what we have
Which is
tonight.
this, yeah. That's true. That's true. Yeah. Thank you. Jennifer,
Yes, I'm not, I could, live with the wording of students coming out or keep it in. I'm a little agnostic on it, but just to provide some context, that it came about because how this whole overlay district evolved in the planning board was they were talking about how can we relieve some of the pressure of housing being lost in town to LLCs, and their ability to outbid regular folks and losing housing to LLCs that rented out for students. So I think because the planning board, just in following their discussions over the last year, they were seeing University Drive particularly as being a place that new housing could be built for students off campus, since it didn't seem like more was being built on campus. So that's how it came to be, which may be unusual in the language for the proposed overlay district.
I'm going to add, I'm raising my hand here. The way it's written, encouraging development and expand housing opportunity, it says including housing. It doesn't say exclusively housing for undergraduate students. And so that is a nod to that conversation and the genesis of targeting University Drive. In comparison to some of the other archipelago buildings downtown, it was always the hope that those would be more mixed than simply student housing. That we would see a mix of folks in the downtown, whereas in this district, it was hoped that students would flock here rather than necessarily being in town or choosing to live in LLC rented places. So again, I don't mind, we could take a vote on it, but I don't mind having the clause in here. Again, it's sort of 6 of one, half dozen the other. Kathy.
I'm not going to say this is a hard and fast, but I do understand all of this as a rationale and why we're talking about it. But that doesn't make me think the clause needs to be here. I watched Barry Roberts talk about his new building, and it's going to be for undergraduates, graduates, and he's hoping some families. And it is because it's just down the street from the university, so there are lots. So I was just pointing out that it strikes me as very odd in a zoning law to talk about who the tenants might be of the building. That was it.
Yep. Thank you. Councilor Haneke.
I move to delete the phrase including housing for undergraduate students from both Article 2 zoning districts, University Drive overlay districts paragraph, and section 17.1 purpose.
Is there a second?
Shane seconds.
All those in favor, let's go from right to left. Kathy Shane.
Yes.
Pat DeAngelis.
Aye.
Councilor Haneke.
Aye.
Jennifer Taub.
Yes.
Pam Rooney is a yes. Our version will block that out.
Did Mandy vote? I was, yeah, okay.
Okay, we can move on.
All right.
So this is being called, this is a January 28 version.
Sure, let me change that title.
Great, thank you.
All right.
Pam, I have,
Yes, Sarah, yeah.
I have a question of Nate. In this, it refers to mixed use is defined as it is defined in the basic zoning bylaw. I'm going to display my ignorance right now. At one point, when I was listening to the discussion of mixed use, we shrank the share of the first floor that needed to be commercial. And when I'm reading this one, most of it needs to be commercial. Is there any conflict with the way this mixed use is set up and the way the standard definition of it is? And I don't have the zoning bylaw in front of me, bylaws in front of me to see exactly with the way the wording, but we backed off from having the whole floor be commercial.
Right, yeah, so the definition of a mixed-use building is a building that has, say, non-residential uses with at least one dwelling unit. And so,
Okay, so that definition is nice and clean that way. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
I think we actually had that definition put in when we were thinking almost having like live-work buildings in the BL or different areas where it could just be one residential unit above like a studio. So it's
Okay, I'm fine. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't remembering that here we've got a more expansive, we're thinking of really big buildings and mainly commercial on the first floor with, except for apartment amenities. Okay, thanks.
Actually, Kathy, the bylaw says no more than 70% of the gross floor area of the first or ground floor shall be residential use. That's what the existing one says. And here we're talking about 75%.
it's a different measurement of the
It's a different-
non-residential space.
Yeah.
So here's the, this purpose statement, the establishment of the district. And so, it encompasses, it hasn't changed. I'll just share a screen here. I don't know how visible that is for everyone, but, it's Amity Street on the north, Route 9 on the south, and then, basically a property over on either side of University Drive, the area zoned business limited and office park. And so, there had been discussions about including the BL property north or, anyways, really, this has been the boundary for most of the discussion with the planning board.
Kathy.
Okay, this is where I have a substantive comment, and I don't think I'll get agreement as quickly. I may not get any agreement, but I would like not to have both all of the east and all of the west side be the overlay. I would like to make it less expansive. And I studied this map and I went back and did lots. And so basically on the west side, that the overlay would come down to around where the current post office is, or the edge of Big Y, and would not go all the way to Route 9. And on the east side, it would come down to that top of where it's Office Park, but that's where the clinic, Cooley Dickinson Clinic is there. There's a nursing home, there's an urgent care center, there's a primary care center. And so it's a funny, yes, you're redrawing my thing, and I made a list of all the lots that to be specific. And what I'm concerned about is unless we would, if we really want to keep those services where they are because we highly value them, I don't see why you do an overlay. And particularly, well, I'll speak to each separately. A lot of primary care doctors have moved out of town because of the property taxes and the rent. So they've moved further toward Northampton along Hadley. My mom's doctor moved out of there. And Cooley, for a variety of reasons, has expanded that complex. And I'm worried that the margin on the outpatient side of Cooley is not the same margin as they get on the inpatient side. And at some point they might want to move away and someone would want to build a large housing complex there. So I want to be protective of it, especially since I don't think we would ever want to see it leave unless it went bankrupt. So I'm thinking of putting the rationale of the overlay is getting development where we really want it. And if we don't want it there, I would exclude it. The Big Y, actually, when you look, you can kind of see it, Nate, in your piece. a part of its building is in Hadley. You know, it sticks out into Hadley, so it's kind of an interest. So maybe that protects it anyway, because I don't know what the Hadley zoning is. But the Big Y has a huge space called Goodwill in it that a lot of people visit, and it's really low margin. CVS probably could be on the first floor of one of these complexes, not a problem. You know, so maybe I'm talking about just coming down to the Big Y. But supermarkets, in a lot of cities, supermarkets are just disappearing because their margins are so low. And so even if there's a long-term lease, I believe in market forces that if a large 6-story apartment building with a commercial bottom, and in New York, there have been a few attempts to build the supermarket underground. And I think this ground surface is so wet that you'd be crazy to put a food store underneath the building in the ground. So some New York have done all the street level, everything else. So my proposal is to do a less expansive overlay, and I'll leave it conceptual right now, but I did write down wording on exactly which lots I'm talking about, and I'll stop. And I know I'm coming in late.
Kathy,
I'm coming
just-
in late on this, but I mentioned it at the council meeting. Yeah, Pam.
if you could have Nate draw your line and continue it so that we understand where you are suggesting.
Okay, so Nate
here-
was
yeah.
Nate
Here's
was
the-
drawing
here-
it with the Nate.
Here's the post office property. Here's the CVS property. So if you're, willing to, go south of CVS, then it would, it'd come along here.
Right, so do we need to stop it at CVS? And then he's done the line correct on the east side. That is where the whole Cooley Dickinson, where it says OP, that lot. And then north of it there is a nursing home, and way in back is the Arbors. And in between, but Nate's little blue line did. So does this need to go already to the edge of, you've done the second blue line a little too low because you're catching part, you're catching part of the Big Y, but it's a weird lot the way CVS has a little piece of a lot that's otherwise all the Big Y, but that blue line is kind of doing what I'm talking about.
Okay,
Otherwise,
Councilor Haneke?
I raised my hand for a different issue, so if people want to speak on this,
Okay,
I'll let them go
okay.
first.
Pat, are you on this topic?
Yes, I am, but I thought Nate was trying to say something in
Okay,
response
Nate.
to Kathy.
Okay,
I just adjusted the line so it's north of CVS. I mean, I have a response to Kathy, but I can wait.
No, I
Okay.
wasn't necessarily trying to say CVS shouldn't be part of it, but CVS is in the middle of the Big Y parking lot, so it's just one extra little lot. I'm done with why I think this is important, Pat, so you can continue.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. Basically, and I apologize to everybody, I cannot remember the name of the company that owns the Big Y property. But they have said in communication with Nate and with and therefore with the committee that they would like to see the overlay go all the way to Route 9. And in terms of visuals and everything else, when we're talking about walkability and tree lines and everything else, carrying it all the way to Route 9 is a really good idea. Big Y is an incredible moneymaker and the family that owns the property, that's what they do, is they make shopping areas so not extending it feels kind of foolish. I have to think about reducing it on the other side, but so I have to think about that one. But not bringing it to Route 9 just seems wrong, and I can't support it.
Jennifer, this topic or another?
This one, yeah, I would like, I've always I preferred for the Big Y lot not to be included, but, I could live with the compromise when we talked about that the entire ground floor would have to remain commercial. I mean, the current owner says they will keep a market there, but ownership can always change. So that didn't really reassure me. I wouldn't want to do anything that jeopardized the Big Y or provided any incentive for a current owner to change their mind or for it to be sold and a future owner to think that there would be a more lucrative use for it. So I just want to respond to that. I mean, and we've all read the email from the owner of that property, but you know, that's only as long as that owner is the owner.
So let's not do anything. Let's just keep it the way it is.
Well, no,
and
we're not keeping it the
change
way it is
No,
because
we
we're
need
talking
to
about the
extend it
overlay
to Route
districts.
9 and stop trying to partition everything off and keep it in some kind of restricted way. I am so tired of this.
So there's nothing you want to see protected? I'm that surprised. I mean, I don't understand that, but I mean, because we're, you know, we still, most of the buildable area would still be in the overlay district.
I was gonna comment a little bit, Pam, if I may. The
Yes.
planning board did notify all the property owners when the hearing started, and so a representative from Cooley Dickinson attended 2 hearings. And I spoke with him on the phone, but he said publicly they have no, you know, just like the owner of Big Y, they have no intention of leaving, and they don't have a problem with the overlay. They'd actually maybe like to take advantage of it on the corner and continue building and have a bigger development in town. And so their only concern was with stormwater and groundwater, and if, you know, if the overlay was going to do something with that. And so really, given the town's wetlands and stormwater bylaw and the fact that you have to meet post and pre-construction standards, they were, you know, ameliorated. And so they actually were fine with the overlay. And same with the Big Y owners. So both the store operators and the property owners, you know, agree to the overlay. The property owners think it's great, right? They are mostly in Eastern Mass and New England. They own some Southern, you know, Mid-Atlantic, but their model is a grocery store anchored property. And there are a lot of MBTA communities that are doing a similar overlay. And so, you know, we have to take it at face value that for them, this is like a, you know, an A++ property for them. They love Big Y, CVS, Dunkin' Donuts. And now that we have to require 100% ground floor retail or non-residential space, you know, even if they were to develop it or redevelop it, it would still need to be 100% ground floor or something that's not apartments or parking. And so, you know, I think that they welcome this change. It's not forcing anything, right? It's like in the purpose, it's an opportunity. So, you know, for instance, the R&D overlay has been in place for 15 years and it's never been used. I mean, this overlay may be put in place and maybe half a dozen properties take advantage of it and the others never do. And so from the planning board perspective, eliminating the Big Y South is just a really loss of some creative development that you could have units here and still have stores and retail. And so why limit the possibility of a lot that's 100% pavement from having more units or a more creative site design? And so it's not forcing Cooley Dickinson to leave, right? So if someone approaches Cooley and says, you know, we'll give you 10 million, they could say, sure, 100 million, sure, whatever, right? It's not saying they have to leave. They don't have to voluntarily take the overlay. And I think the Big Y owners have invested quite heavily in this property. So I envision that they are long-term owners, given what they've, you know, invested in kind of what they've said about this property. So
Thank you.
again,
Yeah,
the
thank you.
CRC might want to change, but the planning board is really comfortable with these boundaries.
Thank you. Counselor Haneke, just checking in this topic or another one?
Nate said basically what I was going to say on this one. But I will remind the committee that there are long-term leases that cannot be broken no matter whether the property owner sells or not that we've been told about. And it would be a real shame if we neutered this overlay district for 40 or 50 years because we fear something that all the owners have told us will not happen in the near future. I'm reminded of something Secretary Augustus of the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities told the counselors at the MMA business meeting for counselors. And it said, zoning is an opportunity, but it never happens 100%. And in 50 years, it might only happen 20 or 30%, exactly what Nate said. But it gives an opportunity. And to take this out, given the changes we've made to make sure that that area remains 100% commercial on the first floor, to give that opportunity to lose the potential for housing above those floors when housing is desperately needed, not just in this town, but in the Commonwealth, would be a real shame. When this conversation's over, I have another comment on this section.
Okay, yep, thank you. Kathy,
So I'm going to, since I didn't make it as a motion, I'm withdrawing. I'm not going to make a motion, and I will speak to this again at the council. I'm concerned about this. I do understand what Pat and Mandy have just said. I believe that when you provide really lucrative opportunities, they tend to happen. And so if I'm still around 20 years from now or 10 years from now, I'll be able to see what does or doesn't happen. I do think long-term, and you already have seen it with what Barry's had to do with his building, it's really wet on the west side. So we may have already developed, there may be some issues on how tall you can go in terms of what the ground below you can handle. So the hopes for, I'm not talking about the big Y area, I'm talking about north of it. So we may or may not see a flourishing here just because when people look at what they're going to have to do with the ground, it raises the cost of a 5-6 story building. So that to me is fine. You know, I mean, we've allowed the opportunity, and if you can't make it work, you can't make it work. So I will withdraw this. I am also worried about Cooley Dickinson, but I love the idea if they think they're going to grow that corner, Nate, and bring more in. We really have a shortage of places to go for either urgent for lab services, and it would be not good for the town to lose it for the amount of distance you have to travel for the next one. So,
Yeah,
so
thank you.
I'm just going to hope it won't happen, and my fears won't happen.
Thank you. Nate, you want to keep going with your text, or are we done with the map?
No, I think Mandy might have a comment on it.
I do.
Okay. Okay.
Before I get to that, I just want to respond to Kathy. This overlay is an opportunity to allow Cooley to expand their services upwards more than they could now, because remember, the definition of a mixed use is just one residential dwelling. We're allowing 6 stories. They could put 4 or 5 stories of medical services with 1 or 2 of residential and expand the opportunity for medical services on that corner much more than they can do now in a office park area in terms of height and what's allowed. I've got a question about the wording here that says in the zoning districts located along the section of U Drive that is north and south, because there are about 4 parcels that are not contiguous to U Drive in the map. And so does this wording affect the fact, are those parcels affected by this wording because they are not along University Drive? There's at least 4 parcels that are not towards the south by Route 9. So I just had some concerns that the wording might conflict with the map.
Could you say something like located generally along the section of University Drive?
Could we see those? If you pull the map?
It's the Ginger Garden and the
okay.
auto park.
It's an empty lot next to the real estate office and in front of the Cooley medical offices. It's not Ginger Garden. It's the auto parts and
Yeah, I mean, so
the
there's a
car
few
wash.
properties that don't have frontage on University Drive that, right, if we're saying along, does that mean that it's something that doesn't have frontage is not applicable? I mean, you know, the building commissioner has looked at this, and so the way we say the BL or office park covers it, but if we want to add a qualifying phrase, that's
as indicated on the map.
right.
No. There's also one up by Amity. Sorry, there's one up by Amity that also doesn't.
Yeah, that's over in the little corner.
Yeah, that isn't contiguous.
The Cayman's
Jen-
building.
Can you insert the map? We don't have a lot of pictures in our thing, but if the map was inserted here, it would at least address what Mandy's concerned about. There's some pieces that aren't technically on University Drive. They have a different address.
Yeah,
So
I guess
could the
what I
map,
think,
just the picture of the map be there?
well, in the bylaws,
Not as,
so,
go ahead, Nate.
yeah, this is the format that would take in the place in the bylaw, and we don't insert a picture. It's the text. So I mean, if we wanted to have something, you know, here to qualify it, I think that, you know, the way the building commissioner and staff has read it, you know, in these areas zoned in these districts along University Drive. So it does not saying like, you know, adjacent to or only has frontage on, I think, but as Pam said, if we say located generally along or something, if you feel better about having some qualifier.
actually, it does say shall apply in those limited business and office park zoning districts. Those
Yeah.
districts are
Along.
along University Drive.
Right.
So it feels like it covers it. Mandy?
Sorry, I have to pull up the district map. The map I have up is the resource area boundaries, so I gotta find the right map. But I think your point is probably very good. Is it covering all of those districts, Nate?
Right, yeah, so whatever is limited business and office park.
Okay, so it does cover fully?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Right, for instance, if there was an intrusion of like, you know, neighborhood residents or something, then it wouldn't cover that, but, you know, the limited business and office park are, you know, contiguous zones right along Route, you know, that section of University Drive in Route 9.
Thank you. Okay, let's keep going.
Okay, dimensional standards, 17.31, we simplified it to say there is no provision to waive or modify the dimensional standards of the overlay except as provided below. We deleted, there had been some, you know, some more, you know, lines here saying, you know, except with different principal uses or something, and it's redundant to what's down here in 17.34. And so, you know, the building commissioner thinks we need this phrase then to allow some of these things that are happening in the overlay. Otherwise, there really isn't a way to have some of this flexibility. And so in 17.34, the maximum building and lot coverage, we have this kind of footnote here. The maximum lot and building coverages shall be determined by the permit granting authority anytime a mixed-use building is located on the same lot with another building with a different principal use. In no case shall the total building and lot coverage exceed the amount in 17.34. And so there is some discretion by the permit granting authority if there's two different principal uses in the buildings, you know, what is the maximum lot and building coverage? However, they can't exceed what's listed here. I will say in the limited business, the lot coverage is 85%. In the office park, it's 70%. Really, the difference now is in building coverage. So office park only limits building coverage to 20%, and BL limits building coverage to 35%. So it's almost like in those districts, we're saying you can have a lot of lot coverage, but a small building, so put a lot of parking. And so to me, it's like we flipped that and said you can have bigger buildings here, take up some lot coverage, and still have some parking. But you know, if you only allow 20% of a building lot coverage or building coverage, but 70% lot coverage, what that really means is you can have a lot of parking. And so we've kind of, you know, adjusted that to allow bigger buildings here.
Nate, I'm just wondering if you would get the same impact if you said something like the maximum lot and building coverages shall be determined by permit granting authority. I mean, in a way, it's whether there's a mixed use building and another use or not.
Right.
Councilor Haneke.
I know I sent you questions with this
Okay.
Nate, and that the question I sent still has a concern of how does a building developer get an idea of where it will be within the sort of difference is between the maxes of the office park and the overlay. But the question I have as I think about this is is the reason this is here is because there are differences, and so if there was another building on and this one came in, would the permit granting authority not be able to use the 85 at all if there was another one on, because, or the 60% building coverage because Office Park is only 20%, even though it was a mixed use building because there was already a non-mixed use building on it? Is this here because that lot cover, that, say, that max building coverage or max lot coverage here that have gone up wouldn't actually legally be allowed if a non-mixed use building were already on there, because that zoning would take precedence?
Yeah, no, yeah, that's what the building commissioner and staff thinks. So that's why, there's 17.31 and then 17.34. So if there's an existing office building that's, compliant with the zoning, but they have a pretty big property, and they said, you know what, we could put a mixed-use building, a second building on the property with this overlay, they may exceed the lot coverage of 20%. They may not exceed, or the building coverage, they may not exceed the lot coverage, but really there's no kind of legal way to do that, given the base zoning requirements. And so, having this provision here allows that. So you could have a building that is permitted, it could be existing or permitted without the overlay, and then whether or not, there's a second building permitted with the, another building permitted with the overlay. And so it allows that opportunity. So.
Okay, thank you.
Kathy, you have your hand up?
Yeah, is this here, are there areas where where Greenfield Savings Bank is and they have a parking lot? Is there room that a large housing project could be in part of that parking lot? So that would be, there's an existing commercial and then one of these comes in. Or do we have some where you could envision there be this cohabitation of something already there? There aren't any homes along this thing, but there's some businesses along. Is that why this is here?
Right, and so there's a few I mean, the Big Y is one, for instance, right? They could put a building up front and keep everything else on the site. It's big enough that maybe they could put a mixed-use building, or maybe they, keep Big Y and put a mixed-use building where CVS is and do something creative. And so this would allow that, having those two uses allowed, and using this, the maximum lot and building coverage of the overlay, and not be confined to the one in the base zoning.
So it's trying to show that if there's already something there, this is what you can do in addition to what's there.
Right, so, like there's an office building on University Drive on the east side. It has a pretty big property and areas out front where you could have a second building, but that second building would probably increase the lot coverage beyond 20%. And so you'd say, well, geez, it doesn't work. But this provision here would allow that to happen for both buildings.
Thank you. Any other questions on this?
Kathy's hand's up.
No, I'm taking it. I've got the dimensions table on the zoning law on my lap, and you're allowing much less frontage here if that's all they need. So you've got some things where they have to have bigger frontage on some of the others. So I can see a narrow building, a narrow deep building could go in. Yeah.
So the front setbacks, these are they're, the Northampton Road have been changed to 20 feet. So there aren't any changes here for front or side setbacks. The planning board did discuss 17.351. So this had been written as a 30-foot buffer that would be vegetated and could not be used for parking. They reasoned that they would just have it be a 30-foot setback. So when the side or rear yard abuts a residential use in a residential district, there shall be a minimum 30-foot setback. And so they felt that there was already, an existing building with parking right near the property lines on both the north and south ends of University Drive. A 30-foot setback is bigger than what's there. And so they felt that that was, appropriate. They also think that, the permit granting authority, most likely the planning board, would also have the ability to say, we want screening between certain uses. And so instead of having something as descriptive as was there, saying it has to be vegetated and it can't be used for parking, this or that, they have that ability anyways to say, can we have some screening? It's in 11.24 as part of site plan review anyways, so they felt comfortable that within this setback, they could then ask for additional screening.
Nate, quick question.
Yes.
So when it says minimum setback, I'm just clarifying or confirming that that is to any structure, or does it still allows, like in residential areas, there might be a driveway within a setback, is that correct?
Right, so a 30-foot setback would be from the property line to a building, not to,
Okay.
it would, so then
Not to
parking or
any-
drive aisle would be,
Okay, so it could feasibly be a lot less than a 30-foot setback to any kind of site feature like parking.
less than 30 feet, I guess I'm not, so, building could be set at 30 feet, and then there's some, some distance there that could be, right, parking or, fire access would probably want, emergency
Yeah,
access. would
so
probably
if you have a drive lane that's 24 feet wide, I mean, you might end up with a 6-foot wide strip of something to vegetate.
Right.
So this that, doesn't protect the residential terribly well.
Yeah, the planning board felt that, what's there now is almost nothing, and so there's screening now, and so this actually allows for more, land to be used for screening if needed in the future. So I agree, it's different than what was presented last time, but they thought they had the ability during the permitting review to say, can you actually, add screening within the setback?
Councilor Haneke.
I just want to say thank you for this. This makes a lot more sense given what I was staring at, because there is literally parking and driveway abutting the property line that we're talking about right now. And so it's already there. And so a setback for the building makes a lot more sense than whatever was there beforehand that I had a lot of concerns at. So thank you for this change. I appreciate it.
Building height, again, 17.362 was modified, so that portion of any mixed-use building within 150 feet of an abutting residential lot in a residential district shall not exceed 40 feet and 3 floors. And so, before it said that the entire building, even if a portion of it was within 150 feet, couldn't exceed 3 floors. And so now it's saying that, that portion of a building would be limited in height. The planning board, thought about this, and they looked at the, Charles Lane in the north side, and they said that, given the height and the depth of the lot, I'd done kind of a scale drawing that even if you put a tall building, a few hundred feet away near the frontage of University Drive, that the shadows or the visual impact is actually still greater from that taller building than a 3-story building, closer to the property line. And so they thought this was reasonable. So they even considered not even having something. They had a discussion about this in the buffer, but they thought, this they understand what this is doing is really, having a stepped approach from the neighboring property. So it's not as if you can have a really tall building at the setback. And they thought that would work.
Councilor Haneke.
Just a similar question that I wrote about Route 9 and the use of abutting. Abutting's presumably a legal term. I was deemed an abutting homeowner when there was a property between mine and a property that's behind me because I was within 300 feet. Does Route 9 disrupt the word abutting such that those houses across the street that are residential, that this provision does not apply to those Route 9 adjacent properties? And that could be the sort of single families that are on the east side of Route 9, the southeast side of Route 9, but that could also be the mixed use building on the southwest side of Route 9, because that is technically a residential building in a sense, at least it has residential. It's got a residential dwelling in it. So does Route 9 disrupt the abutting part in this definition, in this wording?
It does. So after the last meeting, it was a good question, and kind of when you're talking about zoning, if you say abutting properties, it's really their, share a property line. And so, a street or, would sever that. It's interesting because then, we give abutter notices within 300 feet, but really in a zoning, technical term, abutting means sharing a property line. Adjacent is something different. Unfortunately, probably in our zoning bylaw and other regulations, some of those terms are used interchangeably, but abutting has a, kind of a technical legal definition, like adjoining, adjacent, proximal, like all those could mean something similar, but really abutting is sharing a property line.
Thank you.
Jennifer?
Yeah, so I see what you're saying. When we give notification, we've decided it's 300 feet, but it wouldn't be considered, so for 17.362, abutting is adjacent.
It's sharing a property line, so across
Right.
the street is not an abutting
Yeah,
property.
but wouldn't that also be beyond 300 feet? I see, but you're not applying the 300 feet. That's,
So, yeah, I think if I'll just share my screen, I'll jump a bit. What we're saying is if there's residential properties here south of Route 9, that 150 feet would then impact, could impact all of these properties here. And so what we're saying, the word abutting is, doesn't cross the street in this sense.
yeah, I guess I'm an example of where you said we confuse it, because there's a lot of development where I live. We get abutter notices all the time because we're in 300 feet of something, but that's different than being an abutting property.
I mean, the way it's worded is, Master General Law says an abutter within 300 feet. So essentially they're saying, you go 300 feet from that property line, and every property that's touching that within 300 feet is an abutter within 300 feet. So it's basically going property to property. So even if your property is 299.5 feet and a majority of it is outside the 300 feet, you're still an abutter because you're within the 300-foot abutting properties from that, the property that's getting having a permit application. I don't know if there's any discussion on this 362 in terms of what it means, or
Yeah, I've been trying to estimate how much of a building would be within the 150 feet.
Right.
The 150 feet, if we recall your diagram, is from the back door of the house, the
Right.
abutting house. It is not from the property line. If I thought about it, 150 feet from the property line, it means that there could be 120-foot depth of building, which is pretty reasonable. It could be 2 apartment buildings or something like that. If let's say the back of the house is 50 feet from the property line, it means that you've already got 80 feet. There's maybe 70 feet of depth of 3 stories. I'm just trying to say what's a reasonable depth of building that could be at 3 stories and make sense. You're not going to have half a floor of 3 stories and then go up to 5 or 6, within the same section of the building. It just physically doesn't make a lot of sense. But I would like to see the 30-foot 3-story box be required to a normal depth of footprint. I'm not saying this very well.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, I understand what you're saying. A developer is not going to arbitrarily put a building and then decide, well, I'm going to have 40 feet at 3 floors, and then I'm going to have some random amount, or, at another height. I think they would plan it in a way that would work with this. As we said, the idea is to really get buildings, as close to the front of the property along University Drive and not have them to the back. And so, this would allow a second building on a few properties that is near the back, that would have to have a limited height. And so, again, you'd still have the ability to put a pretty big building on the front, but if you wanted a second building, then, it'd have to comply with this. And so I don't, there's already an existing building. If we're talking about the behind Charles Lane, there's an existing building. Would they ever redevelop and have two buildings or something? Perhaps, but they'd have to comply with this. I mean, sometimes I think 150 feet could be made bigger. It could be smaller. This could be worded differently. It could be 100 feet from the property line. I think the planning board kind of decided that for now, this, they understand what this is doing and they think it's, it works. There could be other ways to do something similar in terms of having a, stepping back a building height.
Let's move on. I'd want to take a note. We talked and gave notice to the staff that we would switch gears and talk about the solar bylaw and the submittal requirements list that Chris Brestrup developed at about 8 o'clock. And I'm wondering, we're chugging through this. We have a new member, so we were still raising some different questions. I just want to get the sense of the group. If we are getting close, do we want to continue with University Drive and make our way through it? Pat?
I would like to stick with University Drive and get through it. I think there's enough going on with the solar bylaw that it would be crazy to switch gears at this point. So I would like to get this through and get it where it needs to go to get voted on by us, but also by the council.
Thank you. Anybody?
One more thing, Chris, sorry if that messes you up terribly. I appreciate your being here, but
I'm looking to Dave. If we were to, I'm guessing that will take us longer than 8 o'clock. So if you would
Chris
like,
has her hand up, Pat, too, Pam, too, so.
I couldn't see it. Thank you, Chris Brestrup.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree. I'm fine with you continuing on with University Drive. I think it's a more pressing issue that you want to actually have finished and come to some conclusion about. And the solar bylaw is, there's really nothing pressing right now. So, we can work on that whenever you have time. I'm here if you want me to talk about it, but I think it's, in my opinion, better to continue on with the discussion that you're having. Thank you.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I agree with Chris. In addition to that, Stephanie Ciccarello, who is really taking the lead on the solar bylaw with Chris's retirement and coming back limited hours. So Stephanie was unable to join us tonight. So I think it is fine.
Oh, okay. I thought she was all set to come in at 8 and I was going to ask you to contact her.
I think something came up in her schedule. I
Perfect.
could be wrong on that, but I think I am correct.
Then I'm not going to feel guilty about canceling. Good.
I can text her as well. I'll reach out to
Yeah,
her.
thank you. Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's keep going on University Drive.
Sure, yeah, thanks. We get, I think we've looked at some of these sections. We haven't had much talk about open space and some of the other design guidelines, so we can try to get there. This for 17.4, we have, this was added previously exclusively occupied by any permitted non-residential use. So this 17.412 is saying that these properties, it's really the area around Big Y, shall be exclusively occupied by any non-residential use on the first floor, however, up to 15% of the ground or first floor may be used as incidental or common space to support the upper floors. So that was there previously.
Nate, a quick question. Does this include Ginger Garden and the auto parts store, or is this strictly I can't remember the numbers.
Yeah, so if the map is visible, this includes, essentially this whole area of the overlay. So from south of the post office, essentially, all the properties in this area.
So
So,
I'm gonna bring this up then as a question. So if I sketched out where I envisioned that buildings could occur, as much as I wouldn't want to lose Ginger Garden, because I do like their food, having a residential or a residential slash commercial building across from one South University Drive and the eye doctors actually makes a reasonable pair of buildings along the Route 9 frontage. And I think from my perspective, I don't want to be hard and fast with the 2 or 3 small businesses as much as I appreciate that we have them. If something came along and that Route 9 portion were to be developed as housing, I would be okay with that. So I want to just ask if there are others that have a similar opinion about those particular parcels. Andy?
I think if we're carving out parcels, we carve out the whole section. Across one University Drive South is nearly fully, I think, commercial on the first floor, and that's all we're asking for here. It makes sense. In this particular, I've come around to it makes sense in this particular corner to require fully commercial on the first floor. I wouldn't want these sort of islanded parcels that have to be, I think it makes sense to just do the whole section.
Kathy?
So Mandy just pointed out that that's a whole cluster. The other part of 13D is on the opposite side. Is there a reason you don't mention? So I'm looking at the lots. It's 13D 50 and 13D 49. That's the, and then there's one 13D 9.
Can you put
That-
the
Well,
cursor on
13D
those?
13D 50 and 49 are Cooley Dick and
Oh,
the
okay.
nursing home.
Right, so it's, I think I'm right, Nate. All the ones listed here are on the west side. You
Right.
don't have the 13D on the other side of the street. Is there a reason?
well, right, so the idea is that it's only the west side, so they don't, that's what the planning board wanted. There was concerns about if Big Y were to leave, and so some of this is a compromise. We're saying, well, that whole quadrant of the overlay can be redeveloped as long as the ground floor is 100% non-residential space, except for this kind of incidental 15%. So that's why, they didn't want to consider it across Route 9 or University Drive.
Well, like, these make sense to me. I'm not saying this doesn't make sense. I'm
Yeah,
just
but they
asking
didn't-
about the other side of the street, which is Mandy said, when you go over to Snell, it's commercial on the first floor. So wouldn't you, the other parts are 13D. I don't know why they're all 13Ds, but they're 13D on the other side too. It's,
13D9 is a very, very narrow parcel and the rest of it is all wetland.
right, so, but then there's 49 and 50.
49 is Cooley Dick and
And
50 is the rehab home or whatever it's called.
So I think for the planning board, they didn't want to put this provision of 100% ground floor non-residential anywhere else but the properties that are listed here.
okay,
So, I mean, if the CRC wants to put it somewhere else, they can, but the planning board, this is how they've looked at it. This is kind of this is where they think it's appropriate to have 100% ground floor non-residential. They didn't think it needed to be spread out anywhere
And
else.
so I'm going to drop it. You've answered my question. Thank you. Counselor Haneke.
So I wouldn't support it on the east side, but I do want to point out that 13D 50 is already residential. It's not commercial. A nursing home, I believe, is considered residential, but maybe I'm wrong. But it is not commercial in the sense that we're thinking commercial on the west side of Route 9.
okay, so I don't know how a nursing home, because it's in an office park zone, Mandy, so.
Right,
they-
but it's not commercial like we're thinking Big Y,
No,
CVS,
No,
retail.
it's not selling, you're not walking up and buying something, absolutely. And so
Not
what would,
retail.
and what would commercial, what would a clinic be? A lab and a clinic. It's some, anyway, it's the other side of the street. And you're right, a nursing home is kind of quasi-residential.
But
Thank
it's a
you.
business, so it's,
So multiple buildings and uses there, we had added essentially the three 17.511, 0.512, and 0.513. The planning board thought these were good clarifications. So we'd always said more than one building with any permitted use may be located on a single lot. It now also has these other standards and conditions. More than one mixed-use building may be permitted on a single lot using the overlay district. More than one building permitted without the overlay district may be located on the same lot as mixed-use buildings permitted with the overlay district. And then there's a third provision: additional mixed-use buildings permitted on a single lot behind a mixed-use building adjacent to the street may reduce the non-residential space on the first or ground floor to half the required amount, provided that the other half be located in the mixed-use building adjacent to the street. And so, you know, essentially you're not reducing the non-residential space, you're shifting it to the building that's along the street. And so, you know, the planning board thought these are relatively new. It was things that kind of had been discussed with the CRC and with the planning board, and they liked the idea that it was just clarified with these conditions.
Kathy.
Oh, no, sorry, that's a leftover.
Okay, I do have a question on that, on 17510, the middle paragraph. I wonder if it said more than one building permitted with underlying zoning may be located on the same mixed-use lot as mixed-use building permitted with the overlay district.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? It's
Yeah,
it's
I would say
never,
with
the sentence has never really made sense to me.
it would read this way then.
Yes. And that says to me that we could have two office park buildings and one mixed use, as long as we don't exceed the lot coverage and building coverage. Great, great. So this is a lot of flexibility. Counselor Haneke.
Yeah, I appreciate the addition of these. They dealt with some of my concerns. That same 512 section, more than one means not one. I think given that this is two different zones, two different things, I think that one should actually read one or more buildings permitted with the underlying zoning may be located on the same, because the way it reads now, you couldn't have one with underlying zoning and one with mixed use. You'd have to have at least two with underlying zoning.
Yep. Good.
Would you repeat what you said?
It's one or more
It's
buildings.
just one or more buildings permitted.
Yep. Thank you. That is clear now.
All right, project open space, 17.520.
Excuse me, hold on.
Oh, sorry.
Excuse me, sorry. 17513, I think you're missing a word. It's should on the first or ground floor. It's in the middle of your paragraph. Thank you.
All right, I'll move on to open space.
Yep.
Yep, 520, we've consolidated, there had been a subsequent bullet point, and we've deleted it, and we've, you know, kind of expanded 520. So every project shall provide usable open space for residents and the public. Project open space on the site shall be provided in areas that are not required parking areas, driveways, the multi-use path, service areas, or areas with a steep slope. And so, you know, we've deleted that it would be on the inside or exterior of a building, and a few other things. So, you know, it doesn't say what, I think there's been some questions about what is the open space and what's the right size. I think the planning board has done this with other projects. You know, it could be a small plaza, it could be little alcoves off a walkway. And so, you know, I think that they're comfortable during the permitting to say, okay, this is usable open space. You know, it's not. Yes.
I'm gonna make a suggestion that we change from with a slope greater than 5%. And the reason I say that is that's sort of minimally accessible, whereas 10% is clearly not accessible and therefore would be a really poor choice of public space. And 5 is, you know, again, that's
Right.
nominally accessible. Thank you. Councillor Haneke.
So I asked this question. There's not a requirement that the 10-foot paths line up. Presumably that could get taken care of during site plan review, but can you mandate it in site plan review if there's not a requirement here that those paths line up? And then, secondly, what happens right now? Right now there's an access drive, and this 10-foot multi-use path is intended to be on that access drive, which would presumably remove that access drive from public motor use if a property is developed. Except there are some properties that only have that access drive as access, and they don't have a curb cut to Route 9 in front of their property. They are relying in curb cuts in front of other properties. What happens to those properties if the properties with the curb cuts get developed for the 10-foot wide multi-use path? How do the properties that are in between there get access to their properties at all? And is that something, what happens? And who would be responsible for providing that access if, you know, I think I gave you an example of how would parcel 13B 55 or 56 be accessed if parcels 13B 17 and 19 use the overlay and build their multi-use paths. How would those other two parcels get any access at all? And who would be responsible for the costs of creating that access?
Sure.
Nate.
Yeah, the western access aisle has easements on it so that you can't restrict access to, say, that property you're mentioning without agreement from the property owners. So that would have to be discussed. In terms of not having a curb cut access, that would take a vote of the planning board and then a vote of council to add a curb cut on University Drive. So it's not, there's not an impossibility there. For 70 University Drive, it was a pretty reasonable process to have a new curb cut added. And so, you know, as this, if this overlay were implemented and as projects came about, I think it would become then a discussion with the planning board, public works and council in terms of what, you know, if we wanted to add curb cuts, you know, where are the right locations, you know, along University Drive. So there is a provision from a long time ago about having 6 curb cuts, but that could be changed with an approval of the planning board and a vote of, at that time, town meeting. So I don't see adding a curb cut access to University Drive as a barrier at all. And I think, you know, I think that for the planning board, they you know, they did talk about this and they said, well, let's let the developers be creative, right? Let a developer talk to the neighboring property owner and come up with a solution in terms of access to the property. And so maybe there's ideas we haven't talked, you know, they haven't thought about. There could be a drive aisle near the multi-use path. There could be, you know, something else. So I think they see that this, you know, again, it provides an opportunity, and because the access easement has to be agreed upon by the property owners, it's not as if you can eliminate the access right away. Maybe that has to be a phased approach with a property or two.
Mandy.
Doesn't it then give veto authority over any project to adjacent property owners if they don't want to work with for that easement issue? And is that doesn't seem right to me. Complete veto authority. You
have north and south access, so depending on how you manage it, you know, if you still have some access point, then you have, you know, the easement is still viable. And so, for instance, you know, Barry Roberts on the corner, he's, you know, can work his way down to a point where he can't, he could, he can extinguish the easements because he has control of that. And then, if a neighboring property wanted to do it, as long as they don't impede access from north or south to their neighboring properties, then they can, extinguish the easement.
Kathy?
Yeah, Mandy, even on Barry's property, you see the 10-foot path goes and then suddenly it ends because the next thing is a road. But some of those properties are all owned by the same entity that aren't Barry Roberts, if you look at the owners on them. So they might get developed as a cluster. So Nate's like, you could do a curb cut. So I think it's possible to get, I guess the intent here is to get this over time, if this gets developed, to get a 10-foot wide path all the way down to at least Big Y, the shopping center, if it's still there. So you could get there walking.
Yeah.
And right now you can do that on the other side of the street, but you can't do it on the east side. You can walk in the walkway. You can walk in this little inside path. Okay, I was just thinking of the property owners matter here, and I think they might take that whole little strip of stores and do it all at once if they were going to do it, rather than one by one.
And I was going to also add that in Barry's case, it reverts to the existing public sidewalk, which I would love to see go away and be replaced with this 10-foot wide, but in fact, we do have the ability to shunt people back to the public walkway, but that's not ideal,
It's
obviously.
not the shunting of people that I'm worried about. It's
It's
the
how do you get there?
of getting
Yeah.
a vehicle to some of these properties if the properties around them are developed and the access drive disappears, because under this zoning, you're essentially required to disappear the access zone in favor of a pedestrian only right of way. And some of these properties don't have any direct access to University Drive. They have to have this side, frontage road access. And so I guess my question is there a way to, within the zoning, if the access of the frontage road becomes a problem during the planning stage because it just can't be worked out for whatever reason or something, is there a way to delay the creation of the 10-foot wide multi-use path for years?
So this
For a
provision
particular
17521 doesn't say you have to get rid of the access drive. It just says there has to be a 10-foot wide multi-use path between the front of the building and the property line. So someone could swing the multi-use path and have the building be set back even further on their property, right? I mean, there's probably creative ways to address this without, if we're really concerned about that access.
But
Or they
then
could-
you would not have multi-use paths that connect to each other. Isn't the goal to have them connect? And if one swings it back and the other one says forward and the one swings it back beyond the setback, you can't force the other one to move their setback. In fact, right? I guess I'm still struggling with how this all works in an incremental development sort of way. And isn't the point of a 10-foot wide multi-use path to not have cars going right around next to you? Like, that's not pedestrian friendly. So I don't see keeping the frontage road as a solution when our whole goal is to not have the frontage road.
Sure, I agree. But I'm saying there's different opportunities or different site plans, and there can be many different site plans for one property. So I think the planning board is comfortable using this bylaw, and staff is comfortable working with applicants and property owners to come up with the best solution. And so it might be that you need a new curb cut access.
Right.
And so we're not, we can't, presume every possible site design or option on a property.
Oh,
So
one final question that I don't know if you have the answer to on this. How can zoning require a private landowner to open up their private property for public use? And what is the liability of the town if someone is injured or an accident occurs on that public mandated open space that a private landowner may not have wanted to do, but the zoning bylaw required them to allow public access to. In not limited public access, but public access.
Sure. Yeah, we spoke with an attorney about this and they said, you know, this is fine. Through the granting of easements or licenses, most likely an easement, this would be taken care of. And so zoning can require this. We've asked that and, you know, we'd work with the property owner and an attorney to negotiate an agreement there. So we do it quite a bit, actually, have easements on properties for public sidewalks and bus stops. And then it's the town, you know, the town may maintain them, they may not, but then it's in, you know, a public access easement. There are a lot of them around town.
Okay, thank you.
Including downtown where the sidewalk extends onto public or onto private property. Okay,
We say the planting of street trees shall be required, you know, that was a change that was added a bit ago, but it's changed from the original version. In terms of parking, we say the parking requirements of 7.0 do not apply and 7.2 shared parking don't. And so there really is no formula for parking. We're not saying there's a required 2 spaces. What we are saying is that an applicant is required to submit a parking utilization study and a parking management plan for the permit granting authority to determine an adequate number of off-street parking spaces. So, you know, if they propose no parking spaces, the planning board could say, well, give us a traffic impact study, parking utilization study to show that, to prove that. And so really, they have to come in with something.
Nate, I have a question where in 17.532, the very first line says shared or leased parking is encouraged. And yet 17.30 says shall not apply. Shared parking shall not apply. How do
Right.
we reconcile this?
Well, that section of the bylaw requires you can only do shared parking with a special permit if you have 120% of the required parking spaces on a property. And so essentially you can do shared parking, you just don't follow the 7.2 part of our bylaw.
Say that again.
So in order to use 7.2 right now in our bylaw, you might need a special permit, and you'd have to have 120% of the required parking spaces to even have shared parking.
Oh,
And so what
okay.
we're saying is you don't need to meet those conditions to do shared parking now. You could, right, have some other agreements. So for instance, right now, 70 University Drive and others may have a shared parking agreement through a permit that, you know, at certain hours, these spaces can be used by residents and other hours by commercial tenants. Then we have design guidelines. We say the design review principles shall apply. And so, you know, that's always, in most of the bylaw, even in site plan review, we say that, and it's the planning board always has the discretion of asking the design review board for an advisory opinion. We're now saying that those principles will be used. 17.541, to the extent feasible, a majority of the street-facing facade shall be built along the width of the lot frontage and be generally located, I think we missed a building here, and be generally located along the minimum front setback line to reinforce the sidewalk edge. And so the planning board added the word width here. And so really what this is trying to do is have a building with, you know, the length of most of the street width being developed, as opposed to having a narrow, you know, the narrow end of a building and most of the lot then undeveloped along the frontage.
Keep going.
Overhang awnings has been in there. So with the street facing facade is, you know, the term now, where we've consistently used that, shall have variations in architectural detail, change in plane, or other treatment to break down the scale and mass of a large flat facade. Again, the planning board felt this was enough to give them the ability to require an applicant to change a design if it was one big flat wall. Surface or open parking lot shall not face the street and should be located behind buildings or to the side of buildings a minimum of 30 feet from public ways and shall be screened from adjacent properties. And so really it's saying, have parking be set back a bit.
Counselor Haneke.
Screening. Why is it this say, I'm just gonna use this property, the it's not the hangar anymore. But that property's responsibility to use some of its land for screening to prevent a different property owner from seeing the use. Why shouldn't it be the requirement of the property owner that doesn't like to look at it, say the parking lot, to use their own property to screen? So for example, why shouldn't it be on each Charles Lane landowner, to give an example, to use their own property for screening if they don't want to see a parking lot or driveway? Why is it the U-Drive owner's responsibility to use their property? It doesn't appear that the screening right now is on the U-Drive property. It appears that it's on the Charles Lane's properties. And there are sometimes times when a property owner might not want it screened and it's being forced. I'm talking about a residential property owner may not want it screened and it's being forced on them because of this writing. I grew up in a home that eventually, bordered a cornfield at one point, and there was a park built back there, but there was a parking lot adjacent to my home. It was not screened. We loved that it wasn't screened because it was not fenced. We loved that it wasn't fenced because that parking lot could be additional parking for parties. We could easily, without having to walk out of the neighborhood, up the street and back in on the entrance to the park, get to the park to use it. There may be property owners that want to be able to just walk through their backyard to get to that property. And this provision seems to take that option away from those property owners. And so I have problems with it.
Thank you. Kathy.
I had a different issue with this, not an issue, but up above, you can have shared or leased parking. If you're sharing your parking across two adjacent properties, you shouldn't have to put screening between them. So if I've got two and they say, we're just gonna have all of our parking, think of what I call the mini mall right now. It's just one big parking lot for all those businesses. It doesn't say the hangar and each of these places. And I don't know whether that whole building is owned by one owner. So would this conflict with shared is my question, where you can share it. You shouldn't have to screen it if you're sharing it. So I can make
Jennifer?
it really complicated unless you're sharing parking. I mean, Mandy wants to know why it's there at all. I want to say maybe if you're sharing parking with an adjacent thing, you don't have to screen it. So
Thank
that
you.
was my
Okay.
question.
Jennifer.
Yeah, I mean, I think the least we can do, I would not want to put the burden on the residents of Charlesfield, that those are modest houses. I think that the deeper pockets, who are the developers building, can afford, they have the resources to do screening. I think that it is unlikely many of the homeowners that have been living on Charlesfield, some of them for decades, should all of a sudden, the zoning's changing, that the least we can do for them is to ask the developer of these big buildings to put up some screening. And I think, I may be going out on a limb here, but I think if you were to do a survey, I feel pretty confident the majority of homeowners would say if a parking lot was going to be adjacent to their backyard, that they would probably not welcome that. They would like there to be screening. I think I would even go, I think that that's a fairly good assumption. So I feel like it's a little heartless to say, well, if the somebody who's been living on Charles Field and they're, you know, these are small houses, this isn't that when this building gets built adjacent to them, that if they don't like it, that the onus is on them to incur the expense to do the screening. I think that's not a lot to ask of the developers that are going to be building on University Drive.
Yep.
And I think if two property owners are fine, you know, if we're talking about two buildings that are being built, they could probably decide amongst themselves, they don't need screening, and go to the planning board, and the planning board would probably not make them have screening from the two new buildings from each other.
Thank you. I was going to suggest that we have the wording go and shall be screened from adjacent residential properties. To Kathy's point, I had the same thought. You have parking lots. The similar uses are the commercial the mixed use buildings that we're trying to build. So those are, you know, there's really no reason to screen one mixed use building from another. Just like you wouldn't screen a small bank from the convenience store. So really, I think we're trying to deal with residential properties, and I would totally agree that let the adjacent landowner ask for a gate. This is a very different use than going to the park. So I will definitely support having a screening be required. Councillor Haneke.
There's already a parking lot there. There might be some trees. At least the GIS looks like there's some, at least in the northern part. I absolutely agree with Kathy. But residential properties, if you put a mixed use building in, it's a residential-ish property, right? What are you referring to? What are you worried about? The Big Y already shares parking lots across property lines.
Should we
I just think we assume too much about property owners and what they want or don't want. Yes, a commercial property is much different than a park, but that doesn't mean a property owner doesn't want to minimize their walking to that commercial property from a half mile to 20 or 100 feet. That doesn't mean they wouldn't choose that.
I think I said they could add a gate if they wanted to.
They can't if they don't own the fence.
They
If
can
they
ask
don't own-
for it.
Well, this is my thing. They can't force another property owner to add a gate or pick the screen that would allow them to cut through, because you're telling the landowner that they have to screen from people that they don't necessarily, you know. I think the burden's being placed on the wrong person, because the Charles Lane, if we're going with residential here, the Charles Lane, not every Charles Lane resident might want a fence. Not everyone might want a particular type of hedge if they were choosing stuff, because maybe they would choose something else, but they have no choice in what goes up if you require the University Drive owner to put it all in. Why is it on the University Drive owner to do it all and not the person who actually wants the screening?
So
Thank you.
let me just
Nate,
jump
you
in.
might want to reply to that.
This wasn't, this wasn't generated just for the Charles Lane. It was really, to screen parking in general. And so typically it's the person who's making the impact, the applicant, who provides the mitigation. We don't ask someone who's not an applicant or a project proponent to mitigate impacts, right? So that's the way all bylaws are written, whether it's the wetland bylaw or zoning, it's the applicant who mitigates impacts. And so whether or not we put it in here, 11.24 as part of site plan review requires screening as from parking. And so at some point, it's like, what is reasonable? It doesn't mean you're going to have 100% opaque wall screening parking. Maybe it means there's some plantings. There can be openings in those plantings for people to walk through. There could be variations in types of plantings. It may be a low wall in plantings, right? So I think the planning board, again, is comfortable using this and applying it and making it reasonable. And so I don't think we need the word residential. We could say, like we've done in other conditions, to the extent feasible or possible, But I think the planning board is comfortable, working with this. So shall be screened, it doesn't mean that, it's a continuous 8-foot tall fence, a solid wooden fence to screen the parking.
Nate,
Right.
I don't believe you need the words "to the extent feasible." If it is in the purview of the permit granting authority, they typically go through a checklist and they will talk, I mean, it's really in the hands of the PGA to acknowledge neighbor impact, a butter impact, and they have to go through that checklist. So if someone says, holy cow, you're going to have lights screaming into my backyard from the 6th floor, there may be some request to be doing some mitigation for that, as you use that word. But I think we really are just talking about, in this case, it's single family residential properties that are that we're talking about. Jennifer.
Yes, I would like to see this stay in as it is. I think that's the least we can do for the residents, and particularly of Charles Lane, and that it just feels mean-spirited to take it out. And I, again, I'm going out on a limb. I think that the residents would appreciate that. I suppose they could, always go to the planning board and say, I don't want to be screened. I want to be adjacent to their parking lot.
If we're going to say this, I would, pardon my scrolling, I would mirror the language above to say a residential use in a residential district or something, and so that we qualify it a bit more as opposed to just a residential property. So, something like
I don't think we need to do that personally. I mean, we don't have to change it. I mean, we
we
can
don't have
vote.
to say residential, but it's in there now, so I don't know if you like the word residential or just adjacent properties, or do we remove this addition altogether?
It makes it clearer, Jennifer, if he says residential district, because we're gonna have a whole bunch of,
Yep.
this is an overlay zone, and we haven't done that. It just makes it clearer.
Now I would say something like adjacent residential uses in a residential district.
Yep, okay. But I guess what Councillor Haneke just said, that if you're putting up apartments, those are residential too.
But they're not in the residential.
You're
It's
not
not a
considering that a
residential
district.
district. Right.
They wouldn't
Right.
be in a residential district. So
Right.
everyone's talking about the permit granting authority could do something and work with it and all, except it says shall. So Nate, could it be waived?
It can't be.
It can't be. So there is a must. It's not an option. It's not, oh, if the residential neighbor says, I don't want it, the PGA can't say, okay, we won't require it. It says shall.
I think it's so unlikely that that would happen that I'm personally willing to risk that.
Kathy.
I think the change you just put on residential district solves my problem of inconsistency, because the very next one, 17545, it said share parking lots. So you, across property lines. So you definitely don't want screening between property lines on the type of buildings you're envisioning. We've got, that's the issue. We've got a lot of mixed use mixing, between what exists. So I think this rewording solves but we want them to share it. We want them to consolidate it. We don't want to have any barriers to lots of little teeny tiny parking lots. And I don't know what to do with Mandy's shall, unless the other people don't want it. I'm okay with this wording.
Councillor Haneke.
So section 7.11, I guess still applies if I read this correctly, Nate? Which would mean the barrier has to be not less than 3 feet tall. It's not in this bylaw.
Right, right. But you're saying, are we,
That still applies, right?
the parking lot design standards would still apply.
So the landscape standards, so what do we need this screening?
Sorry for the scrolling.
So how does 7.112 apply? How does that work with shared parking in the overlay district? Like how did Big Y with their two separate lots between CVS and Big Y have no screening on that parking lot if 7.112 applies, or was it built before we had these landscape standards? And how would this apply to shared parking in an overlay district? In the
Well, so-
zoning bylaw itself?
Right. And so that was one project. And so really it becomes, what's the next property, right? In terms of having that screening. And there's also the provision in our bylaw 7.9 that those can be waived for site design, aesthetics, or other reasons. And so given that it was one project, they probably had a waiver request for that.
So it could be waived in section 7, but this section 17.544 cannot be?
Right. Right now, the way this is written, 17.544 has a limited application in that it is only necessary when it's, adjacent residential uses in a residential district. And so if you're providing parking on the west side of University Drive, there's no requirement for this provision because there's no adjacent residential use in a residential district.
Is the Hadley district a residential district?
There's no residential uses in that district.
No, yeah. No, it's not.
I don't have the Hadley map in front of me.
Hadley doesn't like residential on Route 9 ever.
You know, yeah, right. I'm going to interrupt because I just finally looked at the clock. It is 8:33. We have parking, and we're in design guidelines. Sorry.
There's two
So we're
conditions.
very,
We have almost nothing left.
yeah. So can people raise their hands if they feel comfortable pursuing this to the end of the document? Okay, Nate, thank you for sticking with us.
Sure. So we had three more standards or conditions. 17.545 hasn't changed. As we're saying, how consistent is it with the one above? But to the extent possible, parking lots behind buildings shall be consolidated across property lines to maximize efficiency of pay space and curb cuts. 17.546, mechanical equipment should be screened as determined by the permit granting authority, rooftop mechanical equipment. And then 547, loading docks, dumpsters, mechanical equipment, and utility meters, except as required by the public utilities, shall be located in low visibility locations and screened from view by architectural landscape elements compatible with the site and building design. So these have always been there. We removed this over here in 546 that said louvers and other mechanical systems. We said shall not be visible, and really that's almost an impossibility. So really, the screening is what we can do, and we just kind of clarified as except required by public utilities. And so, with bigger buildings, they may be all electric. You're going to have a bank of meters, a transformer box, compressors, and so we work as best we can with the applicant and the utilities to put those in locations that aren't as prominent. But sometimes the public utilities have requirements in terms of, say, where a transformer box is located. But we really try to put those away from the front facade of a building.
Kathy.
Sam,
sorry.
I have no comments on the remaining. I just have a question since I'm new to the process. This looks to me, other than my major proposed change that no one liked, that we've done some wordsmithing. Mandy has one area that she's not happy with, but do we vote this out with these changes? And then we made the one, Nate, that you said the planning board had put in on the, including undergraduates. And we removed that clause, so that's just a clause, but it wasn't substantive. So what's the process on, to me, getting to yes, so this can move to the next stage?
If I'm not mistaken, we can vote tonight to close the public hearing. And then we still would have some time for deliberation and to come up with a document that we can vote on. And I'm just double checking if that's the correct statement. Chris,
Hi,
you're still with us.
I'm still here. I just wanted to know if you had any thought of taking public comment before you close the public hearing.
We have no attendees.
Okay, thank you.
Otherwise, yes. Counselor Haneke.
I'm happy to make the motions whenever people are ready.
So yeah, but Kathy, to your point, the CRC can have its own set of recommendations to council. So, you know, there's a few other changes here, and if there's other considerations, it doesn't necessarily have to be the exact same version recommended by the planning board. And so it seems like there will be some differences. And so that, you know, that's okay. You know, I think it's, you know, we've always shared the same document so that everyone knows what each group is looking at. And I've tried to explain where the changes come from. So it's not as if the CRC has been looking at a version that the planning board hasn't seen. And so there is, you know, some agreement generally about, you know, all the changes.
That's clear, you know, so thank you.
Counselor Haneke.
Are we ready for motions?
It feels like there's a consensus that we have pretty much wrapped our public hearing portion of it, at least.
I move to close the public hearing.
Is
I
there a
second.
Shane seconds. Let's take a vote. Counselor Haneke,
Aye.
Jennifer Taub.
Yes.
I was going to call on Dave Zomek because he's next in line. Kathy Shane.
Yes,
Pam Rooney is a yes. Pat DeAngelis.
Aye.
Public hearing has been closed unanimously.
Thank you, Nate.
Yes. So it is now 8:39 and I'm going to suggest that we not do more deliberation tonight because we've already talked a great deal about it. But we need another motion to we don't need another motion to continue, do we?
So I was gonna make a motion that would finish deliberation because we are now with that hearing closed under a time deadline to get the council to vote. So I don't know if people, we had a lot of discussion, right? We went through this sort of line by line. I don't know if there's more discussion needed, but I'm prepared to make a motion.
I don't see any disagreement. Go ahead.
I move to recommend the council adopt changes to Article 2 zoning districts, the addition of Article 17 University Drive Overlay District, and the amending the official zoning map by adding the University Drive Overlay District as amended at the meeting on January 28th, 2025.
Second.
Hold on, point of order.
That amended should be clearer to not the official zoning map. I did it in the wrong spot.
And also, can you make sure that you include section 2?
That was
Okay.
Article 2.
You
I
already
said
said,
Article
okay,
2.
I missed it. I missed
Yeah.
that. Thank
Chris
you.
Bestrup has her hand up.
I see that. Thank you, Chris.
Hi, I don't know if I understood correctly, but you would be changing the official zoning map. You would be changing-
Sorry, let me rephrase this motion. I move to recommend that the council adopt revisions to Article 2 zoning districts as amended at the January 28th, 2025 CRC meeting. Revisions to, the addition of Article 17 to the zoning bylaws as amended at the January 28th, 2025 CRC meeting, and amendments to the official zoning map by adding the University Drive overlay district as presented at the January 28th, 2025 CRC.
Second, DeAngelis.
Okay. Thank you. Let's take a vote. Let's start with Pat DeAngelis,
Aye.
Jennifer Taub,
Yes.
Counselor Haneke,
Aye.
Kathy Shea,
Yes.
and Pam Rooney is a yes. And we'll get that exact wording and we will. Great. So Chris, you still have your hand up. You're free to speak.
Sorry, I don't need to speak. It was
Okay.
residual or vestigial.
Jennifer,
I'm sorry, I think I asked this last time. I just want to be clear. So the council's going to get the planning board referral and the CRC referral. So we don't want them to send it back to us, the two, because we've reviewed. So I feel like it's like the Senate and Congress. So there'll be a reconciliation at the meeting, or they'll accept, or the majority will vote one or the other. Like, I'm just trying to say, how will that procedurally, the planning board will come and make their, both are going to appear in the council meeting packet. And then we'll discuss both.
I'm going to go to Chris and then Counselor Haneke.
I think what's going to happen is that each group, the CRC and the planning board, will submit their report to town council. And then town council will have a first reading and a second reading. And during one of those readings, I imagine that, well, the first reading, Nate will probably present this document. And then the town council will discuss it, and they'll discuss what's different in the CRC report from what's different in the planning board report. And then the town council will resolve those differences. And it won't come back to you all, as far as I know.
Yeah. Counselor Haneke. Thank you, Chris.
In theory, the document that is put in the motion sheet for adoption will be whatever comes out of GOL, which might not even look like what we recommended just now, because GOL will make clear consistency and actionability type changes. So sometimes they add commas, sometimes they actually, at that point, it probably goes to legal, because I'm not sure there's been a formal legal review yet. A legal might have some changes. They might, KP Law loves to add provided that's all over the place. So what gets put in the motion sheet will be whatever comes out of GOL. The chair of CRC should be writing a report that indicates what our conversation was, where our concerns were, where there weren't, what the vote was, and also probably highlighting some of the changes we made from the planning board version. The planning board report will talk about what they did, but it would be good for the council to know what those changes were, just like GOL always produces a track change version of the document they got and what they sent out, so that council can see what changed from what we recommended, right? That always goes. And then once that motion is on the table in the second reading, anyone can make motions to amend, to add back in something that we got rid of that the planning board had, to change completely that wasn't recommended at all. That happens on the floor at any time. But the version that goes in the motion sheet is what GOL forwards out.
Produces, yeah.
Which Pam needs to forward this version to GOL.
Right. And so I'm going to ask Nate, I have the version that we worked on that came from the planning board, and we'll get your version from tonight, with appropriate whatever headers and stuff like that. and then we'll use that for. So I'm not going to plan to send it to GOL until I have my report in hand. I mean, sometimes GOL doesn't want a report, they just want to read it as actionable. I always think it's helpful to have a report.
So it depends on how long your report will take, because we literally now have a deadline to vote at the council, and that's a second reading. There's at least 2 weeks generally between a first reading and a second reading. And GOL takes probably 2 meetings, like it should get on GOL's agenda as soon as possible. Because if we don't hit that deadline to vote, we have to hold another public hearing with
Right.
the monetarily notice requirements and all.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy.
And I took notes all the way through and marked up. We made relatively minor changes, so I think your report, Pam, doesn't need to be more than a page. We took the document after having met and then made the following changes. And to the extent we have a rationale on them, say the rationale. So I think that's often helpful because it does signals a thing that it was nearly complete. And then we did most of them are non-substantive, but they were clarifying, and then some were more substantive. So,
So I'm going to, I think I'm clarifying my action, and that will be to actually forward the document once I get it from Nate. And I will say I will follow up shortly with a report. So at least that time is not ticking while I hold it for a report. Counselor Haneke.
I would actually ask that the report be more than just what changes we made from the planning board version, because it should include, per our rules, it needs to include things in favor. And so I think in some of the stuff we spent more time on, particularly sections related to where we added 100% commercial, like rationales and summaries of discussions we had about these sections, I think are very important for the council, because we don't want to rehash those discussions from the start at the council. They should read what we did so that they know what we talked about, and we can potentially move the discussion from there, not from the beginning. So it really does need to be a summary of the last 4 or 5 meetings that we've had.
Right.
Yeah, Mandy, so I did, it was tonight's meeting, it to me was a short. And so you're saying there were really some basic substantive things and just, thanks.
Yeah.
That made it easy on me.
And we have the wonderful report formats that are in our pack, or whatever, in our SharePoint. So we'll go from there. One other item, and that is meeting schedules for the out year. And I think what I heard from Athena, and I was trying to look for my email from her, what she heard back and forth from people, that it looked like it was a Thursday, and it was a Thursday afternoon, like 4 to 6. And I wonder if we are basically in agreement with that. And I don't know any other committee. I don't know any other committees. Pat, you're on GOL.
We have not met or talked about it, and there's not any, we've been passing dates, but nothing's been solidified. I'm trying to get it moved to Tuesday, to our old slot, because Counselor Ette is still on it. Needs to be in the evening.
Yeah.
And Pam, did we settle on 4 to 6, or whether there's a question whether we could meet earlier? I have no preference, but I'm just, if we settle, JCPC has not set a time yet, so I just need to know, did everyone agree that 4 to 6 is better than 2 to 4, for example? And
my only concern about 2 to 4 is that if in fact there are people in the community who want to weigh in on zoning, it's really awkward in the middle of the afternoon.
Okay,
I would love to have it. I would love to have it then. But
I'm fine then with 4 to 6.
that, is
When-
that a
When is
consensus?
our 4 to 6 is fine. I could do 3 to 5. I could do 2 to 4. I'd love to have it earlier. I understand the rationale by trying to bleed after 5. It doesn't help those that work a night shift necessarily, but
Yes.
no time works for all of our residents. There's always going to be people who have jobs during the time we meet, no matter
When
what.
is the next meeting, actually?
But the question is, when is our next meeting?
Yeah, yes. So I'm looking, if it's does anybody remember that Athena said maybe the second and fourth Thursdays? Does that ring a bell?
I don't know whether she said 1 and 3 or 2 and 4.
I thought it was 2 and 4. So just for example, in February, February 10 is town council. February 13 is the second Thursday. Do we want to alternate from town council? I don't have a preference one way or the other.
So it will make reports easier if you do them the same week as the council. Well, until council meets 2 weeks in a row, but
Yeah.
it makes
Yes.
reporting easier if you're not one business day before the council.
So can we agree that the 13th of February and the 27th of February will be our next at least 2 meetings, and then I'll send this to Athena and she can give us an official map.
So 4 to 6 on the 13th is our next meeting.
Yeah. And I'm going to write that down so I don't forget.
And I'll hope that
And then,
TSO meets on the other Thursday.
and then well, Athena will do this anyway. If we look at the council meetings, if we're trying to do the week the council meets, every once in a while, it's not every 2 weeks. So just
Right.
taking that into account.
Yep.
Because I need to put it on my whole calendar.
Yeah, me too.
Into the summer anyway, for
Yep.
sometimes.
So we're agreed right now, it'll be, at least for now, we're going to target for the second and fourth Thursdays, 4 to 6 p.m., starting on February 13. We'll
It
go
would
from
be
there.
great to have a full calendar, a proposed calendar for us to actually adopt at the next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah,
So can we have to vote for the next meeting or not?
no,
Okay. So I will work with Athena and then we will send this out for everybody to adjust, and then we'll talk about it at our next meeting. We'll confirm it and adopt it at our next meeting.
and Pam and everyone, so the next meeting, the major topic will be the solar bylaw, or is there anything? I'm just looking, I will catch up if I know what I need to catch up on.
Okay, we had for next meeting, we had potentially University Drive overlay zoning, which is now moot, I think. ZBA and planning board vacancies, I would like to start talking about that, because it takes a while. The 2025 schedule was on the list, and ADU update was on the list.
So not solar. So solar would be.
Oh, well, solar.
No,
Yeah,
I'm literally, I don't want to be a drag, so I will spend time getting to where you are, where you last were on each of these.
Oh, and solar. Solar was there. I didn't read it.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, everybody. Any motion to adjourn?
So I have a request before we do that.
Go for it.
The SharePoint folder and the public packet online are supposed to match, including agendas. And it appears that more often than not, they don't, including agendas, and that makes it really hard. So I would request the chair and the vice chair make sure that whatever in SharePoint is whatever is posted online.
I don't have the control over that, because what I do is I send everything for the packet to Athena, asking it to be posted. So last week I sent it on the 21st with all the attachments, and it got posted on the 24th. And it wasn't until I went to the public posting that I noticed that there were some additional meeting minutes.
Then I ask that
Oh.
you work with Athena to make sure whoever's doing it does it. And that could be you, that could be her.
Right.
But it, as chair, you need to have some responsibility to make sure it does it, whether that's a conversation with Athena or you doing it yourself. But
Yeah.
I would
I
really
can't
appreciate it if
post
they
it.
match.
When
Thank
I
you.
was chair of GOL and the audit committee, I put things in the packet. And so,
I don't know how to do it in the packet. I do it into our SharePoint folder.
well, that's the packet.
I do that all the time.
Well, then I think a conversation with Athena about where she's pulling the documents from is in order, and that is something you should do.
Yep,
And
thank you. I mean, I actually attached them all to the email I sent, so there shouldn't have been changes from that.
also the solar bylaw, there's stuff that needs to be culled. There's a staff version that's active. There's a very old, back till November version that I was looking at. I've been working off of the current staff reviewed version so that it's that doesn't need to be in the packet.
Yep.
We need to kind of get up to date. I will
That's
be
fine.
sending some changes and stuff, but it will be on the current version that's been reviewed.
Which
by
is
staff.
version 8,
Yep.
8, by the way. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I just have to say, because I'm copied on what you send, I mean, you're very timely about sending things to be posted. I'm
Thank
not,
you.
sure where the disconnect is, but
Well, listen, the last council meeting wasn't posted. Several people,
yeah,
so there's a glitch happening somewhere. I don't know what, so I don't know where it's happening, but that's the
I'm
first
gonna-
ever that I
I'm gonna
found.
move that we adjourn the meeting. Is there a second?
Yeah.
It's 8:58 and this
It's a second,
conversation
and I
is
want
not
to
necessary.
thank you. And I want to thank Nate for hanging out with us, and David also. Thank
Okay.
you. Second, I hear a second, yes. Quickly, Jennifer Taub,
yes.
Pat DeAngelis,
Bye.
Pam Rooney's an aye, Mandy Jo Haneke, Kathy Shane.
Yes.
We're adjourned. Thank you all. Thanks for
Thank
hanging
you.
in here. Bye-bye. Thanks, Dave.